Today we will move on to Dirac equation. So if there are questions on the previous one, you should ask.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question.
Please ask.
So, ma'am, the Feynman diagrams we write for vertex like minus I lambda factor and something just like we did na.
Ah,
So we draw Feynman diagrams and we
ah,
directly write its amplitude, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, ma'am, somewhere I read it about it. So there is they said that this formula is only valid for 5-4 theory, means lambda 5-4 theory.
No. So what we are saying is that the dynamics is contained in the matrix element, and the Feynman rules are different for every theory, right? So if you have electrodynamics, it will have one set of Feynman rules. If you have what in fact we looked at was scalar electrodynamics, right, without spin. And if you have FIFO theory, there is another set of Feynman rules. So probably what you were looking at was Feynman rules for the other theory. But every
So
theory
means
has its own Feynman rules, right? We will look at all of them.
okay, okay.
Yeah, we will
So
do
means
FIFO theory also in this course.
if we look up to interaction of electron or electron positron and photon, then we have to look Feynman rules according to electrodynamics, right?
Well, not just electrodynamics, because electrons are also having weak interactions, right? So it could either be only electrodynamics or it could be weak interactions or both. So it will depend.
Okay.
I mean, so right now we are taking a very simple case. Right now we are taking, we are now moving to Dirac equation, so we are moving to particles with spin. But what you have seen so far is you're having a simple charged particle and interacting with electromagnetic field, and we have set up Feynman rules for that. Once you bring
Okay.
up spin, you will find that you will have, in fact, we will still look only at electrodynamics, but you will see that electrons also have weak interactions. So then we will do electrodynamics, then we will move to weak interactions, and that theory will be called electroweak theory. It has both electromagnetism and weak interactions, which are combined together. So the Feynman rules are different for every set of theories, and that gives you the matrix element, which depends. But that is why we say that that is the dynamics. Whereas once you have two particles in the final state, the phase space is the same. It doesn't matter whether it is electrodynamic, strong interaction, FIFO theory, nothing. Okay, that's called the kinematics. Similarly, initial flux is simply kinematics. So all the dynamics is contained in that matrix element. Okay, and for that we write Feynman rules.
Which metric element?
Which, sorry?
So what you are talking about metric element? I don't get it, that ma'am.
The matrix, let me just show you so the matrix element m squared minus im that I wrote, right? That matrix element which appears in the cross section. Let me just do one thing. Let me show you that. Here, can you see this?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
this is the
I can.
matrix element. So this part, right? Minus im mod squared.
Okay.
So that is
So
the matrix element that I'm talking about, and that is written using the Feynman rules, right? So maybe I will
yeah.
show you the next page here where the cross section is written, right? Let me go back to a page where the cross section was written. This all phase space here. This is it. So d sigma is mod m squared. Then the first part, just the this part came from here. Let me look at the previous line. Pf by 16 pi squared root s came from the phase space, including d omega, and 1 by 4 pi root s came from the initial flux. So that is the kinematics. That just tells you that there are two particles in the initial state, two particles in the final state. Energy momentum is conserved, and it doesn't tell you anything about the nature of the interaction. So all the
and
nature of the interaction is contained in this matrix element square.
and these two parts will remain same either we
Yes,
work with lambda
correct.
5 4 theory or
Yes.
electrodynamics, huh?
Provided there are two particles in the final state and two particles in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
initial
yeah.
state. Yes,
And
absolutely.
amplitude will change according to
Absolutely,
theory.
absolutely,
Okay,
yes. So
okay.
that the
Thank you, ma'am.
amplitude now that part is called the matrix element.
Okay,
And
ma'am.
in the field theory course, you will find that that can be expressed in terms of some particular kinds of Green's functions. That's how the relationship will come. Okay. So we will, if that is all, are there any other questions on the last class? Okay, I don't hear anything, so I will go back to, so we will now start on Dirac equation. Okay. So I decided that I will do a review because some person said that they were not very familiar. So I'm going to spend this class just reviewing Dirac equation, and maybe in the next class we will do the electrodynamics with Dirac particles. So Dirac particles are just, we will find charged particles with spin, and in particular spin half only. Dirac equation doesn't apply to spin 1, spin 3 half, spin 2, no, only spin half particles. Okay, and that's what we will see in this class. So basically what happens is that we looked at Klein-Gordon equation, which is, just one moment. We looked at Klein-Gordon equation, which was relativistically invariant, and it had solutions for free particles, which was E squared is P squared plus M squared. So what is the energy then? Energy comes out to be plus or minus square root of P squared plus M squared. Now, there is no way on earth that we can remove the plus and minus sign. It's just a mathematical statement. Once E squared is P squared plus M squared, the energy has to be plus or minus square root. But this is the solution for a free particle which satisfies Klein-Gordon equation. So what do you mean by negative energy states? Negative energy states are usually bound states. So free particle cannot have negative energies. It should have only positive energies. And so there is a problem with trying to write down Klein-Gordon equation consistent with special theory of relativity. So Dirac looked for a linear equation to overcome this, because if you have a linear equation, then E need not be square root of something, E will just be something else. Okay. So what are the 2 points I'm making? Special theory of relativity requires that E and P occur on the same footing. Okay. Which is why Schrodinger equation, which has E on one side and P squared on the other side, is not consistent with special theory of relativity. Klein-Gordon equation is consistent with special theory of relativity, but because the solution, the eigenvalues are E squared eigenvalues, you get E has negative solutions, and that is not acceptable. So what Dirac said was that what you want to look at is an equation which is linear in P, and therefore H psi, which is E psi, is some alpha dot P plus beta M acting on psi. And he found he could only satisfy this equation if both alpha, which is a 3 vector, and beta were matrices with minimum dimension 4 cross 4. And we will see shortly why. Now, to solve for alpha and beta, to find out their properties, you square both sides. So H squared acting on psi is E squared acting on psi, because E is the eigenvalue of the Hamiltonian. And that will be alpha dot P plus beta M whole square. So let us just square this thing. So the first term will be alpha dot P whole squared. Then you have beta squared M squared. Then you will have alpha dot P into beta M. Then the last term will be beta M into alpha dot P. Remember that beta and alpha are matrices, which may or may not commute. So I have written the 2 terms carefully. And we know that E squared, for consistency with special relativity, must be P squared plus M squared. Okay. So let us compare these 2 equations. You can see that the quantity which contains M squared in this equation is only beta squared M squared. Therefore, we find the first point, beta squared equal to unit matrix. Then the remaining terms, which is alpha dot P whole squared, and the second term you can see is simply what is the anti-commutator. I've taken out M, and I've written alpha dot P as alpha I Pi with a summation over the dummy index assumed, so that I take out MPI as common, and I get the anti-commutator alpha I comma beta. This is the anti-commutator alpha beta plus beta alpha, and this whole thing must be equal to P squared. Now the second term is linear in P. There is no way it can be equal to P squared. It means that alpha comma beta anti-commutator must be 0 for all alpha. Okay. And therefore the first term, which is alpha dot P whole squared, I can write as alpha dot P into alpha dot P. And again, assuming dummy indices, this is alpha I Pi into alpha J Pj. So I can write it as alpha I alpha J into Pi Pj. And since Pi and Pj commute with each other, and I and J are dummy indices, I can write this as half of alpha I alpha J Pi Pj plus alpha j, alpha I, pj, pi. But pi, pj and pj, pi are the same. So I take it out and I get the anti-commutator alpha I, alpha j. But you see this must be equal to p square. Since this must be equal to p square, that means alpha I, alpha j half must be delta ij. And immediately you can see that if I is equal to j, alpha I squared must be equal to unit matrix. So by looking at the postulated form of Dirac equation and by writing down the properties, that is E squared is equal to P squared plus M squared, we find that beta squared is unity, alpha squared is unity, alpha beta anti-commute, and alpha I, alpha j also anti-commute. Is it clear? So we have 4 anti-commuting matrices, which are the 3 alphas and beta. And you can see because there are 4 anti-commuting matrices, Pauli matrices are insufficient because there are only 3 Pauli matrices. We need 4 of them. And typically what is written so that you can write this in manifestly Lorentz covariant form, you define a 4 vector called gamma mu with components gamma naught and vector gamma, where gamma naught is beta and gamma I is beta I, alpha I. So you can immediately see that gamma naught squared is beta squared, but beta squared was 1, so gamma naught squared is also 1. And gamma I squared is beta alpha I into beta alpha I. I can bring the alpha and beta together, and I know that these two anti-commute. So alpha beta is minus beta alpha, so I get a minus sign. Beta squared was 1, alpha squared was 1, so this is minus unit matrix. So gamma naught squared is 1, gamma I squared is minus 1. And I've replaced the alpha beta 4 matrices by gamma mu 4 matrices. I've not done anything more than that. But it just becomes convenient. And all the anti-commuting quantities I write as gamma mu is 2 g mu nu, where g mu nu is the metric tensor, which is a diagonal 1, minus 1, minus 1, minus 1. And as homework, you can show that gamma mu dagger is gamma naught, gamma mu, gamma naught. Okay, this is something that we will use later. So maybe you want to write this down in your notebook or something. So let us now rewrite this Hamiltonian in manifestly covariant form. So we write H psi is E psi, which is alpha dot p plus beta m psi. We've written the same equation again. Now I left multiply both equations by gamma naught. So gamma naught is gamma naught, okay? And here gamma naught alpha is gamma I. And gamma naught beta is simply gamma naught, which is gamma naught squared, which is 1. So this becomes m. And E was P0 because the 4 vector P mu is E comma P. So this is gamma 0 P0. And if I bring this to the other side, minus gamma dot P. So this is gamma mu P mu. And I bring m the other side. So gamma mu P mu minus m psi equal to 0. Or I write P mu as I d mu. This is the manifestly covariant form, relativistically covariant form of Dirac equation. Okay. And I will also use a notation which is called the slash notation. Gamma mu P mu is called P slash, just for convenience. So I've introduced a lot of notation, but towards the end of this class, I will actually make you work out various things so that you get more familiar with them. But this is the new form of the Dirac equation, which is either gamma mu P mu minus m psi equals 0 or I gamma mu d mu minus m psi equals 0. Okay. And now because these are matrices, by the way, m is multiplied by unit matrix, and therefore psi is now a 4-component vector. It's a column vector. It has 4 components, A, B, C, D. Okay. Now that we have defined this and we have only free particles because it's a free particle equation, there is no potential here. Let us try to write a continuity equation and identify a conserved current just like we did for the charged scalar case. So first question is, what is the conjugate equation for the antiparticle? So first, since psi is a vector, we will try psi dagger. So I dagger this whole thing. We remember A, B whole dagger is B dagger, A dagger. So I put B dagger first. And gamma mu becomes gamma mu dagger. And I becomes minus I because it's conjugate. And the d mu, of course, acts on the psi still. So I've just put that arrow to indicate that d mu is acting on the psi. And m is a number, so it just remains m. Now you see that if I want to get an equation which is kind of related to what the antiparticle is, I have a gamma mu dagger. So it's not of the same form as equation 1. So I have to do a little more work. So the little more work that I have to do is a new definition. I define something called psi bar, which is psi dagger gamma naught. Okay, and you remember the gamma naught was just beta. Beta squared was 1, so gamma naught squared is 1. So I insert gamma naught squared, which is 1, over here. And I define psi dagger gamma naught as psi bar. This 1 gamma naught is left over here. I can similarly introduce gamma naught squared on the right hand side. So I have a term which looks like gamma naught, gamma mu dagger, gamma naught. Which, if you remember, I had said was gamma naught, gamma mu dagger, gamma naught is simply gamma naught. So now, by rewriting and introducing these gamma naught squared terms and replacing psi dagger by psi bar, I have got something which looks like the equation that we had. The equation 1, which is I gamma mu d mu minus m equals 0. Now we have minus I gamma mu d mu minus m acting on psi bar equals 0. And I've dropped the gamma naught on the right hand side because gamma naught is not 0. So the remaining term has to be 0. Okay, so that means the conjugate equation is with plus m rather than minus m. Okay, now what we do the same thing that we did last time. We take the first equation. You remember that we had done this for phi also. We had the equation for phi. We left multiplied it by phi star or phi dagger. Then we had the equation for phi star. We right multiplied it by phi. So we do the same thing and then we subtracted one from the other. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to take the first equation, left multiplied by psi bar, take the second equation, right multiplied by psi. You can see that psi bar m psi term will cancel. And what you will be left with is this term, psi bar times gamma mu d mu right acting on psi from, this equation. D mu right acting on psi, and the second term which is d mu left acting on psi bar, which I have written as this term here, psi bar I gamma mu d mu with both sides arrows acting on both psi bar and psi equal to 0. And I can take this d mu out and I can write d mu acting on psi bar gamma mu psi equal to 0, and this is what we identify as our Dirac conserved current, psi bar gamma mu psi. So this is the analog of our d mu phi star phi minus phi star d mu phi that we had for the Klein-Gordon case. And similarly, therefore, the 0 component of J is the density psi bar gamma naught psi. Remember that psi bar was psi dagger gamma naught and gamma naught squared was 1. So this is simply psi dagger psi. And psi dagger psi has the usual interpretation of density. It is positive definite as required, and therefore this is a proper conserved current. Is it okay so far? So we've just repeated the same thing with the Dirac equation, and I will also introduce right away the electromagnetic current. Psi bar gamma mu psi was the number current, and if I multiply it by the charge of the electron, which is minus E, I get the electromagnetic current J nu minus E psi bar gamma mu psi. The same thing that we had done the previous time for the scalar case. Now you notice something. We needed anyway, and this is something that is required from special theory of relativity, we needed E squared is P squared plus M squared, which means again we have E is plus or minus square root of something. So that means the negative energy states to you. So what have we done so far? We have taken a lot of trouble to write a linear equation for the energy, for the Hamiltonian. But ultimately, if it has to be consistent with special theory of relativity, it has to satisfy E squared is P squared plus M squared, which means free particles still have negative energies, and therefore this problem remains. And we will see how Dirac has actually solved this. We know how he has solved this by invoking that the negative energy states are actually antiparticles. But let us look at the solutions before we do that. So let us look at solutions to the Dirac equation. We know that all free particle solutions have to be of the form psi is some momentum dependent quantity u of p times the evolution operator e to the minus I 4 vector p dot x. So this is minus IET minus p vector p dot vector x. Okay, this is the usual.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, that your notation like p with an underbar, that is a 3 vector, right?
Yeah, this is a 3 vector. Yeah, this is a 3
and
vector.
when we don't have anything, it's 4 vector.
Though this is a 3 vector for the following reason, because this u of p, the p is the independent object, the 3 vector p, because in terms of 3 vector p and the invariant mass m of the particle, the energy is determined. So normally people will write it as only 3 vector p and will not write it as 4 vector p. Okay, and you will see why when we come down, when we see the explicit form of u of p, you will see why it has only the 3 vector and not the 4 vector. So just wait a few minutes and we will see why it comes. Okay.
And man, in the exponent, it's a 4 vector, right?
Yeah, in the exponent, it's a 4 vector. That's why I specifically said it's a 4 vector. And by the way, this equation is wrong. This is not mod p. We still have negative energy states. So this is not mod p. This is simply the vector, 3 vector p. My mistake. Okay. So the Dirac equation I have written again as we have p slash minus m psi is equal to 0. And since the e to the minus ip dot x doesn't bother you, it means that p slash minus m acting on u is equal to 0. Okay. Now we remember that u, which is the coefficient apart from the oscillating term of psi, is a 4 vector, right? So instead of writing a 4 vector, we write it in terms of 2 components each. That is because we have chosen a representation for gamma mu. I'll come back to this later. We have chosen a representation for gamma mu, which is a 2 by 2 form. Gamma naught is unit matrix, 2 by 2 unit matrix, 0, 0, minus 1. And the 3 vector gamma is 0, where sigma are the sigma, Pauli sigma matrices minus sigma 0. So each of the 0 is a 0, 2 by 2 matrix. So gamma and gamma naught are 4 by 4 matrices. But I have written them in a convenient 2 by 2 dimensional form. And therefore my 4 component wave function u, I have written as 2 components, ua and ub. So ua has 2 components and ub has 2 components. So there are 4 altogether over here. Is this clear? It is just a convenience. Now, this representation is not unique. Any representation which satisfies gamma naught squared is 1, gamma squared minus 1, and anti-commutation between gamma naught and gamma can be allowed. Yeah, ask.
I don't understand how UA and UB has 2 components.
Because psi was a 4 vector, right? Psi is 4 vector because gamma mu is 4 dimensional.
Yes, ma'am.
So now I have replaced the 4 dimensional, sorry, this one. I have replaced this 4 dimensional by 2 by 2 form, where each of these elements are 2 by 2 matrices. The sigma is a 2 by 2 matrix. The 0 means 0, 0, 0, 0. So I have compactified the notation for gamma. So I have compactified the notation for u as well. So ua is actually ua1, ua2, ub1, ub2. So it's a 4 vector over here. Okay? Is it clear?
And one UA for particle and UV for antiparticle, like
not
that?
yet, no, antiparticle has not yet come. We have to show that there are antiparticles, right? We have not yet got there. Right now, we just have a solution psi. We have not even solved for it. We have to solve for it now. Once we solve for it and find the solutions, we have to interpret them physically, and we will then interpret them as antiparticles. So we have not yet come there. I'm just giving you the answer since most of you have done Dirac equation, right? So you know what that is. So all I'm saying is that I've made it compact 2 by 2 dimensional notation for gamma, and hence a compact 2 by 2 dimensional notation for u, so that I can solve the equation easily. Okay. So what is my solution? What is my equation? P slash, remember, was gamma mu p mu. I have gamma mu p mu minus m times u equal to 0. So let us look at gamma mu p mu. That is gamma naught e minus gamma dot p. So what was gamma naught? It was 1 and minus 1 diagonal. So that will give me e and minus e along the diagonal. What does this e mean? This e is multiplied by the unit vector 1. So e is actually e0, 0, e. Is this clear? So this term has actually e minus e along the diagonal and zeros elsewhere. I hope there is no confusion. Okay?
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Okay, very good. Only one person is listening to me. Okay, fine. And gamma dot p, you can see gamma is off diagonal. So gamma dot p will just be sigma dot p and minus sigma dot p, which is what I have put here. And then I have a minus m. So minus m is minus m multiplied by unit vector, and now 2-dimensional unit vector. So that will just give me minus m along the diagonal. I put minus m along the diagonal. So gamma mu p mu, which is this, minus m into unit vector, is e minus m minus e minus m, and this gives only off diagonal elements, minus of sigma dot p, minus into minus plus sigma dot p, acting on ua uv equal to 0. And now since it's such a simple equation, I can write it explicitly. The first term is e minus m into ua minus sigma dot p ub equal to 0, which I have written as e minus m ua is sigma dot p ub. The second one is sigma dot p ua minus E minus M UB equal to 0, which I have taken that minus sign out and written E plus M UB is sigma dot P. So UA is related to UB, UB is related to UA. I have coupled equations. Also, the solution depends on the sign of E. Why does it depend on the sign of E? If you look at this, okay, I want to get both on the same page. So E minus M means that if E is greater than 0, E minus M can vanish when E is equal to plus M. If E is negative, then when E is minus M, E plus M can vanish. Okay. So obviously, if E is greater than 0, I don't want to solve for UA because that will give me a denominator E minus M which can vanish. Is it clear? I can solve this equation as UA is sigma dot P by E minus M times UB. But if I use this as the solution for E greater than 0, then I have a divergence when E is equal to M. So I will instead, when E is greater than 0, I will instead solve the second equation. That's what I've written over here. When E is greater than 0, then E plus M is always greater than 0, never vanishes. Only E minus M can vanish. So I solve for E plus M UB is sigma dot P UA, and I write the solution as UB is sigma dot P by E plus M times UA. And I will explain why I've written the S here. I will show you that there is something called the spin. I will come to it later without interrupting the way we are getting the solutions. Let me just say that the UA, you remember that U had two components, right? You can have two components which can be either 1, 0 or 0, 1. And you can immediately see that this will be related to spin up and spin down states. But we will see where the spin comes in a few minutes later. Okay, right now we only have two possible solutions. It can be either 1, 0 or 0, 1. Is it okay? And once we have UB in terms of UA and UA is known, then of course the whole solution has the components UA, UB, which is chi S, which is either 1, 0 or 0, 1, and sigma dot P by E plus M chi S. And these are the solutions for E greater than 0, and the normalization factor is yet to be found. Now, when E is less than 0, this can vanish, so I must solve the first equation. So that's exactly, yeah, ask.
Can you go through one more time from the fact that why you choose second equation, not first?
Yeah.
Means
yeah,
I'm not able to hear.
I'll try to get both the equations on the same page. Okay, fine. So there are two cases over here, right? We know that we know already that Dirac equation satisfies E squared is P squared plus M squared. That is already known. We have seen it already. That means when the 3 momentum is 0, which it can well be, E can be M or E can be minus M. Both are allowed. Now, when E is greater than 0, then E minus M can vanish when E is equal to M. So if I solve this as UA is sigma dot P divided by E minus M, then when E is equal to M, the denominator vanishes, UA goes to infinity, and that is not a valid solution. Okay. So when E is greater than 0, I use the second equation. And for the same reason, when E is less than 0, I use the first equation. Okay. So you understood the solution, right? The way the solution comes is like this. And when E is less than 0, I solve the other way around. What I do is I solve the first equation, which is E minus M UA is sigma dot P UB. Then UA is this quantity, or sigma dot P by E minus M UB. But E was negative. You remember E was less than 0. Because E was negative, I can write it as minus of mod E plus minus M. I've taken out the overall negative sign as a minus. So my U, and since I've already got solutions S is equal to 1 and S equal to 2, I call this S is equal to 3 and S is equal to 4. And this is minus sigma dot P by mod of E plus M chi S, where chi S is again 1, 0 or 0, 1 and chi S. And these are the solutions for E less than 0. Now you see, normally when I have one differential equation, I get one solution, right? You don't get 4 solutions for one differential equation. So this is a first order differential equation, which has given you 4 solutions. So this is the amazing thing about it. So Dirac wrote down this equation in 1928. He interpreted the negative energy solutions as antiparticles in 1931. It means he took 3 years to sit and figure out, because until then nobody had heard of antiparticles. Nobody knew that such things existed. And I still find that this man was remarkable. I don't know how he even came to such a solution, but he realized that. So, okay, first of all, I will make some more comments about the antiparticle solution when we come to spin. But right now, you see that I will make some more comments about the antiparticle when we come to the time evolution of the antiparticle states. But the fact is that this one differential equation has four solutions: two with E greater than 0, two with E less than 0. All four solutions are orthogonal. UR dagger US is equal to 0 for R not equal to S. And this normalization constant I write as homework, but probably I will ask you to do it in this class itself. Okay, so up to here is okay. You can show that these solutions are orthogonal. It's very straightforward. Okay, now as I said, we have now introduced chi s as up 1 0 and 0 1 as the spin eigenvalues, and that is the reason is the following. Okay, if you look at this equation, we had h psi is alpha dot p plus beta m psi, and since psi was written as ua ub, I wrote h ua ub is e ua ub, and I have simplified alpha dot p plus beta m as m sigma dot p minus m. Now you see that we have two solutions, two possible chi-s for the same energy. And this is a reflection of the 2 by 2 matrix set of solutions. There is a twofold degeneracy that two solutions have the same either positive or negative energy. And this already indicates there exists another observable which commutes with both H and P. And the eigenvalues of this new observable, which we call the helicity, can label the two states. So that is where the spin comes in. Sigma is the spin operator, which is sigma 0, 0, sigma. And the quantity which commutes with the Hamiltonian, which is therefore a conserved quantity and a good quantum number, is the helicity, which is defined as sigma dot unit vector P. P hat is not the operator P, quantum operator P, but it is the unit vector along the vector P. And therefore, sigma dot P is simply the 4 by 4 matrix, sigma dot unit vector P 0.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I lost my connection from the point you start describing spin part.
Okay, fine. So you see that for E greater than 0, you had two solutions. Chi-s was 1, 0 or chi-s was 0, 1. Similarly, for E less than 0, you had two solutions. So that means there's a degeneracy. There is a twofold degeneracy, two states having the same energy. This means that there is one more observable which commutes with the Hamiltonian, which can label these up and down states, and that is nothing but the spin. In particular, it is the helicity, which is sigma dot unit vector P. Sigma is sigma 0, 0, sigma, 4-dimensional matrix, and sigma dot P is this matrix, sigma dot P hat 0, 0, sigma dot P hat. And your homework is to show that sigma dot P hat commutes with both H, which is given over here, and with P. Okay, the second is of course trivial. Now,
Excuse me, ma'am. Are we defining this matrix sigma dot P, or like it is motivated from something? Like
it is
the diagonal form of this matrix.
Yeah.
This matrix sigma dot P, it's like in diagonals, right?
It is a diagonal, yes.
Yeah. So is it motivated from something, or we are defining?
No, it's not motivated from anything. It actually comes out of. See, you have to ask the question that since there is a twofold degeneracy, there must be one more quantum mechanical operator which commutes with the Hamiltonian, and that turns out to be sigma dot P. Okay, and that is the form of sigma dot P, from which you say that there is another spin operator called sigma, which is simply sigma 0, 0, sigma. Okay, that is just pakka. You can always get it by asking what is the quantity that commutes with the Hamiltonian and with P, and you will get this as the answer. But the thing is that if you go back to UA and UB, if you look at this form of the equation, let us look at the equation for E greater than 0. Normally, for a massive particle, P is less than E, right? If M is 0, of course, mod P is equal to mod E. So this is just has dimension 1. It has value 1. But when mass is not 0, the numerator is less than the denominator, because sigma dot P is simply the component of P along the sigma direction. Right? There is no more than that. It's just a number. So this quantity that you see over here is always going to be smaller than this quantity. That's why this bottom component is called the small component. Same way, the top component here will be called the small component. This value will always be smaller than this value. And you will find when you look at solutions that you have got is that there is a reason that it breaks up into the 2 by 2 form. There's a reason why we solve Dirac equation in the 2 by 2 form, because you can write it as really two sets of two-dimensional vectors, and your Dirac spinner is actually a combination of those two. Okay, there is actually a group theory basis underlying that, and you will find that when the mass is exactly zero, the upper component and the lower component simply come apart. They are completely independent, and you can solve them independently. You can see if you look at this equation. Let me go back to that equation here. If mass is zero, okay, you can see that there is no more coupling between the upper and lower components of UA and UB. And that is why this two-component form actually is the larger and larger the mass is, the smaller and smaller the second component is. And when the mass goes to zero, then it simply decouples between the upper and the lower components. So that's the reason why you have that. Okay. Yeah. So let us look at the physical interpretation of helicity. First of all, helicity commutes with the Hamiltonian, so it's a good quantum number. Okay. It's the component of spin along the direction of motion, because sigma dot p was defined as the helicity. And since it's a diagonal matrix, I can just look at the effect of one of these quantities, that is the 2 by 2 matrix sigma dot p, acting on either the upper component or the lower component. So I can ask, what is sigma dot p acting on chi s? And when the momentum is along the z-axis, this will just give me sigma 3 acting on chi s. And we know that sigma 3 pulls out the plus or minus 1 spin of this object, right? That's what sigma 3 does. The eigenvalues of sigma 3 are plus minus 1, and therefore half sigma 3 eigenvalues are plus minus half. And this is the helicity eigenvalues in this case as well. Okay, so there are two helicity quantities, plus 1 and minus 1, or if you define half sigma dot p because it's a half spin, that gives you the spin half or minus half sz component. Is it clear? However, please note that helicity is frame dependent. What does it mean? Let us say that the particle is moving with some momentum p, which can be very large. But if I choose to observe this particle with a momentum which is larger than p along the z direction, then the relative momentum of this looks to be negative, right? In that frame, when I'm moving faster than this particle and along it, then the helicity actually flips from plus 1 to minus 1. So it is a frame dependent quantity, except in the massless case, and I will make some comments about that later. Okay? So here is, yeah, ask.
So, like if we move faster than a spin up particle, then it will change spin. That is you are saying?
Yes, it depends on which direction I move, no?
Yeah,
If I move in
mean
the opposite, if I move in the same direction, yeah, it will change, not the
Yeah.
spin. Spin will not change, helicity changes. So what we will find is that there are two quantities. I will define something called chirality later. Chirality is frame independent, but it is not conserved. It's not a good quantum number. Helicity is a good quantum number, but it is not relativistically invariant. It is a frame dependent quantity. This will bug us throughout our lives in particle physics. We have to be very careful, because when we measure a good quantum number, we should measure helicity. But very often we want to measure something called spin or chirality. And the two may not always agree and can cause a lot of confusion. So this is something that we have to be very careful about. So it is frame dependent. If I move faster than the particle, then it will look like its helicity has flipped, and that's absolutely great. Okay. But in that frame, helicity will still be a good quantum number.
So it is not spin, right?
No, it is not spin, it is helicity.
Spin is invariant. I mean,
No. Spin is a very loose statement. What we will call is something called chirality, and we will come to it later. Okay, we will identify what is chirality. So, okay, we will come to that, because you see that just when we write sz operator and sigma Pauli matrices, these are not Lorentz invariant quantities. So there are two ways of defining spin. One is through something called the Pauli-Lubansky vector, which I will not define in this class unless someone is really, really keen. And the other is through something called the chirality, which is more what we kind of notionally attribute as the spin of the particle. So we will come to chirality soon.
ma'am, the expression here, the sigma 3 by 2.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
basically the SZ
Yeah,
operator, right?
yeah, sigma z. It's a sigma z operator. Yes, absolutely.
So I was asking whether I mean if the example you gave, I mean if we go in a direction faster than the particle
Yeah,
and we measure the we make a spin measurement, would the
it will
spin be
come to minus half. Yes,
okay? So it will.
it will change. That's the whole point. It is exactly that statement that it is frame dependent. So there
Ma'am,
must be
what
some
is the
way of
other name you said apart from chirality? Just now
chirality.
you mentioned.
Chirality. We will come to chirality.
No,
So
ma'am.
don't
Just
worry.
apart from chirality, one more vector something
Helicity.
you
This is
mentioned.
helicity. Sigma dot p is called the
Uh,
helicity operator. I put the half to make the connection with spin half particles. That's all.
no, ma'am. You
Helicity
said
is equal.
there are two schemes like from where one picks
Pauli
the.
Lubnansky.
Pauli Lubansky. Oh,
Yeah, that is what I was asking. Yeah.
can you see my note?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It's called the Pauli Lubansky vector. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is written in a completely Lorentz covariant way. Okay, but we will not be really looking so much into spin in this course because it's an introductory course in particle physics. But if anyone is interested, just please look up Pauli Lubansky vector. And that is really the proper Lorentz invariant way of defining spin. But for all intents and purposes, what we will call chirality will be sufficient for us. We will identify and we will in fact I will make more remarks towards the end of this lecture. Okay.
So, ma'am, in this Pauli-Lubansky vector, the spin is written in a Lorentz invariant form, right?
Yes, 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 absolutely.
But here we are saying that if this is frame dependent,
Yes.
and but
Yeah,
so
helicity is frame
experimentally,
dependent.
okay. So this is I mean, I'm confusing between spin and
Yeah,
helicity
don't
actually.
confuse between spin and helicity. That's what I'm saying. Because I put the half here so that you can make the connection with spin half particles, which is what the electron or Dirac particle is. But the conserved quantity is sigma dot p, and this half minus half only occurs when only pz direction is there, when p is only along pz. In general, p can be in any direction, and sigma dot p will have all components, sigma 1 p1, sigma 2 p2, and there is no direct connection between spin and that is the spin eigen s3 sz eigenvalues plus minus half and the helicity eigenvalue. Okay, what you need to know is this: in a given experiment, there is only one frame, and in that frame, helicity is absolutely conserved. So in any experiment, helicity is conserved. If I want to analyze the data from that experiment in any other frame, I'm completely allowed to do it because the cross section is frame invariant. It's a Lorentz invariant quantity. But if the experiment told you that the helicity was, say, plus half or plus one actually, because the half is not there for the helicity. Suppose the experiment told you that helicity of that particle was plus one. I can analyze the whole thing in a frame where the helicity was minus one or even minus 2 by 5 or whatever I want, I can do. But in that frame, everything will be conserved. If there are in states and out states, the helicity will be conserved between the in states and out states. Is that clear? There will be no difference between them at all. But the actual values of the helicity in that new frame will be different. As I said, instead of being plus one, it may be minus 2/5. But then there will be minus 2/5 in the initial state and minus 2/5 in the final state. And therefore, helicity has to be a good quantum number. It's a conserved quantity. Is it clear? In every frame, it is a conserved quantity.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
But it's a little tricky, so that's why I'm highlighting it. Ask.
Ma'am, just one side question. Ma'am, using Pauli-Lubansky vector, we can define the spin only for massive particles, right? Not for massless particles.
See, massless particles and spin has little more complication, but you can actually write, because even for the photon, I don't know, since you're asking this question, I assume you know a little more about things. You can write actually, since a photon is a spin one object, you can write it in terms of spin half, which is the fermionic operators, and then you can introduce a Pauli-Lubansky vector. Although for the photon, the spin is written in terms of epsilon mu, which is the Fourier, what do you call it, Fourier component of A mu. When A mu is written in terms of, in the Fourier space, that the Fourier transform of the A mu potential, right, the vector potential, is defined to be the polarization vector of the photon. But you can actually rewrite that in terms of the cross product of two spin half particles. But that is really, really advanced. You may not even see it in the second level particle physics course, but you can do it. Okay, you can do it. But yes, for a spin one massless vector particle like the photon, if you remember, I don't know, I will write here. Okay, so the Fourier transform of A mu is something called epsilon mu, and that is called the polarization vector, and that is what defines the polarization directions of the photon. So spin one massless case, very, very different. Okay, so anyway, I don't want to go in that direction anymore. Are there questions just regarding the helicity and I have not yet defined finality, and the fact that helicity is a good quantum number, that is very important. Okay, is it okay? Shall I go on? So we now come to why we call this spin, or why we identify sigma with spin. So let us go back to the non-invariant form of the Hamiltonian. Okay, H is alpha dot p plus beta n. Let me define an angular momentum three-vector operator L, which is r cross p. Okay, then you will show that H does not commute with the L does not commute with the Hamiltonian. It gives you alpha cross p. And similarly, this sigma, which we have implicitly identified as the spin operator, does not commute with the Hamiltonian. It gives plus 2i alpha cross p. And the combination L plus half sigma, which we identify as the total angular momentum, is conserved. So instead of my saying all these things, I think I just want you to spend 5 minutes working this out. Okay, will you please do it? So I will. Okay, so I'm going to wait. It's now 2:20 in my watch. So I'll wait for 5 minutes. Should I break you up into subgroups? Do you want to discuss with each other or do you want to do this individually?
What we have to prove, ma'am? Can you repeat?
I want you to show these three things. Define angular momentum operator L, which is r cross p. Find the commutator of H with L and get this answer. I've given you the answer. Therefore, L does not commute with the Hamiltonian. Similarly, sigma, which I have defined as sigma 0, 0, sigma, does not commute with the Hamiltonian. But the combination, which I call total angular momentum, which is L plus half sigma, is conserved. That is H comma J, commutator is 0. So I want you to prove this. So if you think that you need some help, if someone is not familiar, you can do it together or you can do it individually. What would you, I can break you up into smaller subgroups. Should I do that? Or will you just work it out on your own and discuss with each other and come back to me in 5 minutes? Can somebody answer which way you want to do this?
Ma'am, group will do that.
You want to do it in groups? Okay, fine. So let me get hold of this. Okay, so I guess I just assigned you an order of where you were, okay? So just, I think they were, so I think Adarsh, Rakesh, Vaibhav. Are you having difficulty?
And this virtual discussion is really not good.
Sorry,
It would be a lot better if we were discussing one-on-one, like physically present.
I can't hear you. Did you say it's good or not
You're
good?
not audible, ma'am. I think you can.
Am I muted? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
But I couldn't hear what the comment was. Was it good or not good?
Krishna, what were you
Still
saying?
not audible.
Krishna, you are audible. You just say what you're saying. Hello?
Am I audible to you, ma'am?
Yeah. Tell me. No, you made some remark about this one-on-one versus I didn't understand which you preferred. Hello? Krishna has muted himself. Did anyone hear the comment and can tell me what it was?
Oh, Krishna is saying you are not audible, ma'am.
Oh. But you can hear me, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So if anyone can hear Krishna, just tell me what he said about this way of working. Is it good or not good? Did anyone figure it out? Okay, we'll ask him when he rejoins. I think he's there. He's just not talking. He can chat maybe.
Ma'am, he is going to reconnect.
Oh, okay. Nice. Okay. Okay. I just have too many things open on my screen, so I had closed the chat window. Okay, until he reconnects, I guess everybody has managed to solve it.
No, ma'am, I am not able to solve it.
Okay, let me just.
But I will try it.
1 second. Let me just do one thing.
I can't see your screen.
Yeah. I'm trying to share something else which I'm not able to do. I don't know why. Just one moment. Somehow it's not showing me that particular screen. I don't know why. Okay, so I'll send it to you all later. Sorry. So while I was waiting, I also solved the problem. So I scanned it and put it up, but it's not letting me show that screen. I will just put it on the Slack chat so you can take a look at it. Okay. So in case you're not able to finish it, I will. I mean, it's not very neat, my solution. I just scribbled it on the back of my notes, but it's all there. You can take a look at it. So basically, one requires you to understand that R and P don't commute, and the other one is that alpha I and alpha J don't commute. Okay. So what you'll get is something which is again alpha sigma I and sigma J don't commute, and that will give you sigma K, and that gives you back your alpha cross P. So that's the way in which you solve these two. And the trick is always to use A cross B as epsilon ijk rj pk. Okay. So that's the way to solve this. And you can immediately see the third one follows automatically. Once you
Ma'am,
get these two, yeah, ask.
in the sigma vector means summation
Ah,
sigma that you have written. That is sigma bar or just sigma? Because
this is
we
sigma
have
3
different
vector.
meaning.
Sigma 3 vector.
Oh, these are vectors, huh?
Yeah, sigma 3 vector. That's how you get alpha cross P is a vector on that. This sigma here, we have identified implicitly sigma as the spin vector, which is small sigma 0. I put it there in
Oh
the
yeah.
chat, right? Sigma 0,
sigma x
0
cross
sigma,
sigma.
where sigma is the vector, 3 vector sigma. So what you should do is find the commutators H with
Okay.
sigma I, the ith component, and you will get it to be alpha cross P, ith component. Okay? So what happens
Can
is that
you?
there is a sigma here. Okay, for some reason I'm not, okay, let me try sharing that screen and see if I can share it once more. Uh, Okay, so what I'm doing now is it's not letting me share. So I'm trying to share my entire desktop, and I'll clean it up so that you can see. Can you see what I put over here? Can you see one untidy looking sheet?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. So that's what I have done. I just solved it while waiting. So here L is R cross P, ith component is R cross Pi, which is epsilon ijk rj pk. And therefore this I think everyone got, is it?
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at this H comma sigma I.
Yes, ma'am.
So there is alpha dot P plus beta M, sigma 0, 0, sigma. And this alpha dot P plus beta M was in the previous page, M sigma dot P minus M, comma sigma 0, 0, sigma, which is here. So just forget this last part. So this is this comma this and another bracket outside. So M into sigma is M sigma plus sigma dot P into 0 is 0. So this first term is M sigma and so on. So you just multiply A into B and I put this B again so that I can do B into A. I get this minus this and that gives me 0, 0. And this is sigma dot P into sigma minus sigma sigma dot P. Okay. So that's what I've done on the left hand side. Sigma dot P into sigma minus sigma sigma dot P. I've written sigma dot P as sigma j pj. So I've brought pj out and sigma j into sigma I because it is the ith component. So the sigma should have been sigma I, right? So I put it as sigma I. So this is sigma j sigma I minus sigma I sigma j. But the commutator of sigma j sigma I is 2I epsilon jik sigma k. Okay. And I can rewrite ji as minus epsilon ijk. And it's epsilon minus epsilon ijk pj sigma k, which is p cross sigma. So this is minus 2I p cross sigma. So this is minus 2I p cross sigma minus 2I p cross sigma. And that is exactly 0 minus 2I p cross sigma minus 2I p cross sigma 0, which is minus 2p cross alpha because 0 sigma 0 is alpha, right? Here. Alpha is 0 sigma is sigma 0. So that is what I got as alpha. So
And
that is
please
plus 2
scroll up a little.
alpha cross. Sorry?
Please scroll up a little. Scroll the screen up a little.
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, alpha is this. Alpha is, see, here, beta alpha is 0 minus 0 sigma minus sigma 0. That's how I remember gamma, okay? But gamma is beta alpha. So alpha is beta inverse of this, and beta is same as gamma, and gamma is gamma inverse because it's a diagonal matrix, right? So beta inverse, gamma inverse, all are 1, 0, 0, minus 1. So alpha is 0 sigma 0. So this is 0. If I bring out minus 2IP cross, minus 2IP cross, it will be 0 sigma 0. So this is alpha because 0 sigma 0 is simply alpha I because this is sigma I. So this is minus 2I p cross alpha. So that is plus 2I alpha cross p because p cross alpha is minus alpha cross p. And that's exactly what you were supposed to show. Ith component. Everything is ith component. Did everybody understand this? I can send you this sheet, though it's extremely untidy, but I can clean it up and send it to you. Everybody understood this, right?
Yes.
Alpha commutator with R is 0.
Yes, alpha and R are in different spaces, right? See, alpha are Dirac matrices. R and P are in space. I mean, space meaning like 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional space-time. So, for example, here you look at this, right? You look at L, which is R cross P. Here it is R and P which commute, which gives you the, okay, you dropped H cross, right? So that's why you got the commutator of R and P gave you this non-zero value. Here it's the commutator of sigma and sigma which gives you here, sigma j and sigma I which gives you this value.
Yeah.
So that's what you have to be careful about. So the amazing thing is that one is a space-time quantity, which is the orbital angular momentum L. The other is some internal spin quantity, but the two together are conserved. Okay, so I'll go back to my original. Oops, 1 second. Okay, now something else has gone wrong and it's refusing to let me share that window. So I will just delete that window and you can still see this, right? You can still, okay, you have other stuff, but you can look, you can see the old way we were, right? Our lecture notes. Everyone can see the lecture notes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. So we will continue. So that's what you have shown. So that means the combination which we call the total angular momentum is now conserved. Okay. Now we come to antiparticles. How do we define antiparticles? So you see we had 4 solutions, U1, U2, U3, U4. So let's look at this. U1 and U2 had the E greater than 0 solutions, and they are the usual free particle solutions. Nothing more to be said about them. For U3 and U4, we know that energy and momentum are less than 0. They are both negative. So U3, U4 are U3, U4 of minus P. And here I write it as minus I into minus P dot X, which I can write as plus I P dot X. And this U of minus P, I define as V of plus P. So what have I done here? I've redefined U3, U4 as V2, V1. That is because the 3 and 4 get shifted to 2 and 1 and not 1 and 2, because if you go and see whether it is spin up or spin down, if you go and look over there, then 1 and 2 are spin up and spin down, and 1 and 2 are also spin up and spin down, okay, for the antiparticle. So what have you done here? E less than 0, P less than 0 are now defined in terms of plus P naught greater than 0, which is a particle going backwards in time. That is, if you look at the time component of P dot X, it is minus I into minus ET, which is of course plus I ET, but I can move the minus I outside and I can put the time as minus T. So I can think of this particle, antiparticle, having positive energy solutions going backwards in time. This is called the Feynman-Stueckelberg interpretation. It is a convenient way of doing things. It doesn't mean the particle is actually going, or the antiparticle is going backwards in time, but it gives you a physical interpretation for what this antiparticle means. We will then relate it later to something called time invariance, which means that AB going to CD will be related to CD going to AB by doing a time invariance operation on this. Okay. Now, since we have now got negative energy solutions, your P slash minus M U psi of P, which was P slash minus M U e to the minus I P dot X equal to 0. P slash is negative, I replace as minus P slash. And for the negative energy solutions, I've written U as V. So the negative energy solutions will now satisfy minus P slash minus M V equal to 0. Whereas the positive energy solutions will satisfy plus P slash minus M U equal to 0. And with this definition of U and V, this P is always positive definite. So now I put a modulus on this vector, 3 vector P. And you can see therefore that it's only a 3 vector. The fourth vector is completely defined. always E greater than 0, which is equal to the positive square root of 3 vector P square plus M square. Is it clear? Okay. There is nothing more to say about antiparticles except to ask that we had earlier defined psi bar as psi dagger gamma naught, which was the conjugate of psi. Does this psi bar represent the antiparticle? The answer is no. The way to look at it is to look at, and I will just end, I think I will probably take some 5 or 7 minutes extra just to finish this. We know that the antiparticle should be associated with the opposite charge. So I must somehow bring a charge into the equation. So let's consider the interaction of the Dirac field with the electromagnetic field A mu. Just like before, P mu goes to P mu plus E A mu. So in the Dirac equation, which is gamma mu P mu minus M psi, I replace P by P plus E A. And I've simply expanded it out and written over here. If the antiparticle has the charge minus E, then I expect the antiparticle to satisfy everything else being the same, E going to minus E and psi going to the charge conjugate psi C. But this psi C wave function is not the same as the psi bar wave function, if you remember. Psi bar wave function did not contain this, right? It contained, in fact, minus of this and minus of this. It contained a minus sign here. So how do we interpret psi C? Let us first take the conjugate of this equation. Psi going to psi star. So I goes to minus I, gamma mu goes to gamma mu star, gamma mu goes to gamma mu star, psi goes to psi star, d mu and m are Hermitian or scalar, they don't change. And I can rewrite it in this equation. I want it to look like this. Okay. I have a psi star here. Instead of d mu plus E A mu, I have a d mu minus E A mu. So I have the required negative sign, but I have a gamma star and not a gamma. To fix this problem, I must find a new matrix called C, and it's called, technically reasons, it will be called C gamma naught. So that if I left multiply or insert over here C gamma naught into C gamma naught inverse, gamma star C gamma naught is equal to minus C gamma naught gamma star. So let us just implement it and then ask what the meaning is later. So I will write psi star as psi gamma naught inverse C gamma naught psi star. I don't know what is C, I have to find it out. By definition, A inverse A is 1, so I've introduced unit matrix over here. I'm always allowed to do that. Then this whole quantity, C gamma naught psi star, I define as psi C, which is my conjugate wave function for the antiparticle. Then this C gamma naught inverse multiplied by gamma mu star minus gamma mu star makes this exactly plus gamma mu with C gamma naught inverse on the other side. And since A times B equal to 0 and A not equal to 0, I drop this quantity and I get this equation equal to 0, which is exactly the equation that I wanted. That means psi bar is not my conjugate, but my conjugate wave function is this quantity, C gamma naught. Sorry, it's in the previous page, I think. Here. My psi C is my C gamma naught psi star. And since psi dagger is nothing but psi bar transpose, psi star is written as psi dagger transpose into C gamma naught. And you can do the math and see the C psi bar transpose. So the charge conjugate of psi is not psi bar. It is some matrix C times psi bar. That's very important. And the C comes out to be minus I gamma 2 gamma naught. That satisfies all the properties that we require. We want it to satisfy C gamma naught gamma mu star is minus gamma mu C gamma naught. And you can ask what is the matrix that satisfies it. It is this matrix, and it has C is minus C inverse is minus C transpose and is equal to this. Okay, so the charge conjugate of psi is psi C, which is C psi bar transpose and not just psi bar. And you will see that if you now write the current corresponding to the charge conjugate, J mu conjugate current, it will come out to be plus E psi bar gamma mu psi. Whereas J mu was minus E psi bar gamma mu psi, which means that this corresponds to a flow of current with the charge plus E rather than minus E. So this is the correct charge conjugate of the electron, and that is what this new antiparticle corresponds to. So I will stop here. I won't go beyond this. We will because the rest of it is simply the properties of psi. So if there are any questions here, I will take them. Otherwise, we will take up the rest of it in the next class.
Ma'am, one question about gamma matrix. Ma'am, the form that you had written, that was with a lower index or with an upper index?
I will show you.
And they are not same, right?
Yeah,
They're not
yes,
the
ma'am.
same.
I also was having the same
Sure,
conversation.
sorry, I will show you. One second. I'm going back to the definition. Here. So you see that what we have done is that gamma upper mu is gamma 0 vector gamma. Okay. So when I write gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3, they correspond to this. This gamma corresponds to 0, sigma, minus sigma, 0.
So they are upper indices, right?
Upper indices. So the lower index will contain the same gamma naught. By the way, you know that the time component will not change. Gamma upper 0 and gamma lower 0 are the same. So gamma lower mu is either upper or lower gamma naught and minus gamma. But you notice that in the Dirac equation,
Minkowski metric.
sorry?
They are lowered by the Minkowski metric.
By the Minkowski, yeah. By the G mu of the Minkowski, the G mu tensor of the Minkowski space. So you can see that always I'm having this combination, upper and lower. So this is a scalar quantity. If I took gamma mu lower, then I should take d mu upper. Sorry?
What is your choice for alpha?
Alpha are 3 vectors.
No, ma'am. They are the matrix form of alpha.
Oh,
There are conventions, right, with alpha and gamma.
alpha is fixed. Here, alpha, okay, fine. You can just, I wrote it somewhere, right? I think I wrote it in that extra page which I removed. So alpha is,
Is it 0, sigma, sigma 0?
yeah, it is 0, sigma, sigma 0, correct.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So basically, gamma, 3 vector gamma, what is that? 3 vector gamma is 0, sigma, minus sigma 0, and that is beta alpha. Now you see that I have written alpha I lower. That is because alpha upper or lower doesn't make sense because it's a 3 vector. There are only 3 alphas, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3. This does not form part of the 4 vector. So whether I write alpha lower or alpha upper, it doesn't make any difference at all. The upper index gamma I is denoted as beta times alpha. Is it clear? So 3 vectors, you don't care about whether they are upper or lower. It's exactly like epsilon ijk upper and epsilon ijk lower are the same. But if I write an epsilon
in charge conjugation operator, you defined with a lower index, right? I, gamma 2, gamma 0.
The gamma 5, the gamma 5 operator.
C operator, charge conjugation.
Charge conjugation operator. Yeah, gamma 5 lower is defined as gamma 0, gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3. Lower. And you can do it as homework to find out what is gamma 0 into upper gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3. And please find the answer and satisfy yourself. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
And what does it actually signify?
Gamma 5. Gamma 5 is the chirality operator. We will have lots more to say about it. Okay? So I didn't see there's a lot of just computation. I didn't want to just keep on computing and all of you fall asleep, the 2 after lunch. That's why I made you work out those things by yourself. So we didn't complete all these. So when we look at this, sorry, I just go to that part and show you. Here. So we are going to do all the properties of these components. Okay. So we have 2 choices. Maybe what I'll do is I'll put this up on Slack or somewhere, and you can try all of them. So this U dagger U is 2E, which is what is required. You remember this? We had this also. 5 star 5 was 2E even for Klein-Gordon case, and that's very important because that makes it Lorentz invariant, and that can give you the quantity rho, which is the 0 component of J mu, right? Yes. So you have to show this here, and that gives you the definition of this overall constant n, which I never told you what it is. Then you can show U bar U, you can show U dagger U, you can show completeness. Then you can show this chirality I will do for you, okay? But maybe at least these 4 properties on this page, you can do by Tuesday when you come to the next class, so that we don't have to, just accept this and or work out in the breakout rooms. We can just, you people can do it and then come to class, okay?
Ma'am.
Yeah.
I had problems with UR and US. I'm not able to. I was not able to get that.
This UR dagger
Means
US is delta RS.
means what they represents and what are index R and S.
R and S are two different indices which go over 1 and 2 only. Right? You remember that US, where S is equal to 1 comma 2. Sorry, let me just go back there. Are the solutions, right? Here. S is equal to 1 or S is equal to 2. So when S is equal to 1, the solution is some normalization constant times 1, 0, sigma dot P by E plus M, 0. And when S is
Okay.
equal to 2, it is 0, 1, 0, sigma dot P by E plus M. And similarly, you can expand out this S plus 2. So 3 will be S is equal to 1 and 4 will be S is equal to 2. There are 4
Yes.
solutions, right?
Yes.
2 positive energy, 2 negative energy. And they're distinguished by the label, which is the spin, which is actually the sigma dot P. You will see that these two solutions have different values of sigma dot P, which is the helicity operator. One will have helicity plus 1, the other will have helicity minus 1. We even know which one it is, right? This is traditionally upspin and downspin. So this is helicity plus 1 and this is helicity minus 1. Okay, you can work them out just to get more familiar with it. Are there any more questions?
So what is VR then?
VR is one of them. S is equal to 1 or S is equal to 2, right? Let me just show you that equation again. What was here? So for example, let me read this out. U1 dagger U1 is to E. U2 dagger U2 is to E. U1 dagger U2 is 0. U2 dagger U1 is 0. So R and S go over 1 and 2. Okay, Weber?
Okay, ma'am.
Same with VR dagger VS. Now we have defined U3, U4 as V2, V1, right? With positive energy solutions. So you see, this is very important. Plus 2E. No more minus. Even the negative energy states have positive definite density, rho. Because U dagger U is just rho, right? Because psi bar, gamma naught, psi. But psi bar is psi dagger, gamma naught. So gamma naught is 1. So psi dagger psi is rho, which is always the definition of rho, right? So that is U dagger U or V dagger V, and it's always plus 2E. So the way in which we have now redefined V is that it's always positive energy solutions. But technically speaking, we think of them as antiparticles, and therefore the Feynman Stuckelberg say it's like the particle going backwards in time. But now even the antiparticles have positive definite energy. There are no more negative energy solutions. That is the great solution of Dirac. He converted the negative energy particle solutions into positive energy antiparticle solutions.
Okay.
Okay.